Okay, so the shiur today, which I called Insights to Shivat Zion, or the Return to Zion from Ancient Times to Modern Israel, is actually about a time that in retrospect, we call Shivat Zion. We call the Return to Zion. I'll call it Shivat Zion. But what I want to show is that if we look at all the different sources that tell us the story of these days of Shivat Zion, it's not so clear-cut that this was actually a great time that would be coined and will one day be called Shivat Zion, and we'll look at it in retrospect and say, this is a moment in history that we should all be remembering. And I'm going to start with a spoiler to say that we never know when we're living in such great times that one day someone will look back and say, these were coined times that had really special opportunities that were missed or not missed. You can judge from your own point of view. So the shiur today is not on one specific chapter in Tanach. You're going to have to bear with me. We're going to run through different books and different chapters with one question in mind, and which is, what was it like to live in the days of Shivat Zion? Who came back? Who preferred not to come back to Jerusalem? Who would we, on which side do we stand, and how could we understand both decisions? So that's our starting point for today, and that's why I called it Insights to Shivat Zion. So in order to understand something about Shivat Zion, there are 3 dates that you have to keep in mind. I'll show you a few more dates, but these dates, if you're not holding them in mind already, you should definitely, in my mind, remember them. They are important dates in our history. And there are 3 different dates here on your screen. The first one on the left is Galut Yehoiachin, 597 BCE. Keep it in mind, because these are the exiles that we're going to talk about later when we ask who came back or whose children's children did or did not come back. These are the people in Galut Yehoiachin, King Yehoiachin's exiles, 597. We're talking to about 11 or 12 years before the temple was destroyed. The next date we have to keep in mind is 586 BCE, Churban HaMikdash. We all know that this is the event that we also fast for, and that, as I said, is about 12 years later. The third date, which we'll reach a little down the road, but just so we have a perspective, will be when the Babylonian Empire falls and is changed with the Persian Empire. And what happens is that there's Hatzarat Koresh, Cyrus's declaration, that enables the Jews to come to Israel. So really, when we're talking about Shivat Zion, if you look at the mouse, we're looking at this date here, 538, of who came, who didn't come, and what really happened. But in order to get the full picture, as I said, we have to start from 597. Why is 597 so substantial? 597 is so substantial, even though we're talking 12 years before the temple was destroyed, because it's the first time in the Jewish history ever that Jews are exiled out of the country and are expected to keep their Jewish identity and live in Jewish communities and even have a prophet with them. Meaning, it's not the first time Jews were exiled. 150 years earlier, 732 BCE, 722 BCE, the 10 tribes of Israel are exiled. But in those times, no one knows what happened to the Jews. They basically are part of the Assyrian Empire in different places. No follow-up. We don't keep track of them. We don't have a prophet with them, and we don't have no idea what happened to them. I'll put in parentheses and say maybe in the last few years, we see maybe the Ethiopians are those generations, maybe other Jews that came back to Israel. But for 2,000 years, we're assuming that the Jews that left Israel and the 10 tribes in 722 BCE are not part of the Jewish nation anymore. And here, for the first time in history, you can follow the mouse and you see how Galulei Yehoiachin went from Jerusalem literally to Tel Aviv. The Tel Aviv name of the city is named exactly after this city where the exiles were in Bavel. And of course, you can see their route, by the way. They couldn't cross across the desert, which is why they had to go where their water source is, which is why you kind of see that it's a little roundabout, but that's the way they reached the exile. And here, for the first time in history, as I said before, they're Jews sitting in exile and expected to keep a separate Jewish identity. It's these Jews that started the diaspora Jews, and it's these Jews that any Jew sitting, living in a Jewish community out of Israel, is a continuation of from 597 BCE, and it's not coincidental that this happened already 12 years before the temple was destroyed. Why is it not coincidental? Because we're talking about a strong population that left Jerusalem and asked itself, how do we look at ourselves abroad? So in order to understand what the relationship was between these two communities that we just saw here before, the community sitting in Jerusalem here, and the community sitting in Babylonian here. I'll remind you that the community in Babylonian has a prophet. His name is Yechezkel. We'll see his words in a minute. And then we'll see the words of Yirmiyahu to the population sitting in Jerusalem here too. And what is the relationship between them? So here we'll see a few brief psukim from Yechezkel. I'll read them in Hebrew. Ben Adam, achecha, anshei geulatecha, v'chol bet Yisrael kulo. Yechezkel is called human, man. The people around you are being told by the people in Jerusalem, asher amru lehem yoshvei Yerushalayim. What are they being told? Oh, rachaku me'al Hashem, lanu nitna haaretz lemorasha. You guys have fled away, you guys are far away, but that doesn't mean anything about us. We're going to continue to be the center of Jewishness. We're going to be the center of Jewish lives. You, like the 10 tribes earlier, are not going to be relevant anymore to the Jewish nation. We are here to continue in the land of Israel and to continue the Jewish identity of the Jewish nation. This, of course, all takes place, and it's being said, I'll remind you, when the temple in Jerusalem is still standing. And what does God answer them? Lachen emor, tell them, Ko amar Hashem Elokim, you're right, Elchaktim bagoyim, vechi afitzotim ba'aratzot. I did scatter the Jews, I did remove them from the Jewish land, from Israel around the Gola, but ואהי להם למקדש מעט בארצות אשר באו שם. But you should know, God, as I am with them as a small temple, mikdash me'at. I know we use today the phrase mikdash me'at to say shul or synagogues, but if you look at it as in the pshat here, it's small temples in the countries that they have reached. Meaning, Yechezkel tells the people around him, Jews are going to keep their Jewish identity in the diaspora, and God will be, Hashem will be in their midst. That's, I would say, part one of the conversation. You would say that this maybe it would change after the temple was destroyed, because after the temple is destroyed, it may be clearer for the Jews in Israel, those left after the temple was destroyed and after the matzor, the sage, and after there was such hard times on Jerusalem, what did the few Jews, or however many Jews living in Jerusalem, think afterwards about this specific question of how should we treat the Jews in the diaspora? And here we have another conversation, here too with Yechezkel, this time in chapter 33, Lamed Gimel, after the temple is destroyed. And let's hear how the conversation sounds. The conversation is, Ben Adam, again referring to Yechezkel, Yoshvei HaCharavot ha'ele, the people in Israel who are now in the ruins of their land after the temple was destroyed. What are they saying? They're saying, Al Admat Yisrael omrim lemor, oh, you think that we're not relevant anymore, that only you Jews in the diaspora are the relevant ones? Well, we have something to tell you. Echad haya Avraham. Abraham was but one man. וירש את הארץ, ואנחנו רבים. לנו ניתנה הארץ למורשה. What do you mean? Even if there are very few of us, we're still more than one. We're still more than Abraham. We're still more than Avraham Avinu. So what if the temple was destroyed? You guys in the exile, you guys in the diaspora are totally irrelevant. were the center of the Jewish nation even after the temple is destroyed. And what does God answer? God doesn't tell them, you don't have a case. He tells them, you don't have a case because of the way you're acting. לכן אמור עליהם כה אמר השם אלוקים, על אדם תאכלו, ועיניכם תישאו אל גילוליכם, ודם תשפוכו, והארץ תירשו. You're sinning in such harsh ways, and you want to inhabit the land. You expect the she'erit of Am Yisrael. You expect the continuation of the Jewish nation to come out of you. And he continues to tell them, עמדתם על חרבכם, עשיתם תועבה, ואיש את אשת רעהו טימאתם, והארץ תירשו. Look at how bad their sins are. You're still sinning, and you expect to והארץ תירשו, possess the land, meaning you expect the Jewish nation to continue from you. And here's the final word of God. כה תאמר עליהם כה אמר השם אלוקים. And this is a very hard verse to read, because it's after the temple was destroyed, after they barely survived from Nebuchadnezzar and his armies, and God tells them, אם לא אשר בחרבות בחרב יפולו, ואשר על פני השדה לחיה נתתיו לאוכלו, ואשר במצדות ובמערות בדבר ימותו. No, no, no. You're not going to be a continuation of the Jewish nation. If this is how you act, you're going to die, not by the hands of the Babylonian army, but by the hands of God. Still, this message is really an impossible message to understand. The message that basically tells the Jews sitting in Bavel, you are going to be the she'erit, or in our words, it's up to you for me, says God, for there later to be a opportunity of Shivat Zion. The rebuilding of the Jewish nation, or the rebuilding of a new temple, will not come from the Jews left there with Gedaliah, or will not come from the Jews left in Israel. It'll come from the Jews into the diaspora. It's such a hard message to understand that Yirmiyahu in more than one place, but we'll quote here chapter Kaftet, also sends this message, and this time from Israel, but he sends it to the Jews in the Golan. What does he tell them? ואלה דברי הספר אשר שלח ירמיה הנביא מירושלים אל יתר זקני הגולה ואל הכהנים ואל הנביאים ואל כל העם אשר הגלה נבוכדנצר מירושלים בבלה. אחרי צאת יחוניה המלך והגבירה והסריסים, שרי יהודה וירושלים ואחרש המזיר. So this is a scroll that Yirmiyah sent from Jerusalem to the leaders that are now in Babylonia after they were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. And what does he tell them? What's his message? כה אמר השם צבאות אלוהי ישראל לכל הגולה אשר הגלה מירושלים בבלה. This is what you have to tell the Jews in exile. בנו בתים ושבו וניטעו גנות ואכלו את פריין. קחו נשים והולידו בנים ובנות וקחו לבניכם נשים ואת בנותיכם תנו לאנשים. You should build families, you should marry, you should build houses. And ודירשו את שלום העיר אשר הגליתי אתכם שמה והתפללו בעדה אל השם כי בשלומה יהיה לכם שלום. You have to fully integrate to life in Bavel. You have to marry, you have to build houses, you have to feel good, and you have to remember that you're constantly thinking of Jerusalem, because when you pray for Jerusalem, when you think of Jerusalem, when you ask how's Jerusalem doing, you're connecting yourself to the Jewish nation, to the Jewish identity, and that's how you're going to survive. Not only you, but the Jewish population will survive. Until when? Ad matai? And there are different dates we'll discuss briefly eventually, but first we'll say 70 years, it'll be 7 years, 70 years until you come back. So what was life like in the exile? How did the Jews feel? How did these Jews that we're going to ask in a few minutes, why did or didn't they come back? Or how was Shivat Zion in their eyes? How was their life in Babylonia? So here we have a few extra biblical sources. I'll mention two. The first is the Al Yehudu clay tablets. I don't know which of you were privileged to be in Jerusalem in Museon Israel, not in Museon Israel, sorry, not in the Israel Museum, in Museon Artzot HaMikra, in the Bible Museum land in Jerusalem. They had an exhibit that closed down about a year ago. Now they left just a small section of it, of the Al Yehudu clay tablets. What are these tablets? They were found about a decade ago, and they were published just 5 or 6 years ago. And they're all a group of tablets that tell us a lot about the Jews' life in Bavel, in Babylonia, dated to 570, 585, exactly these years of Galut Yoyachin, and after the temple's destroyed, and until, and even after Shivat Zion. What do we learn from the tablets? First of all, we learn that the Jews own property. The Judeans sitting in Bavel, and you could see where exactly we are here on this slide. I put a circle around where they were found. They sold cows, they bought fig trees, they sold slaves, they had property, and they weren't maybe the highest society of the Babylonian communities. They didn't live right in the center of the center city, but you can see even from the map here, they lived not so far away from the center. And we learned from the tablets that their life was pretty good. How do we know that these are Jews? First of all, they all discuss Al Yehudu, the cities of the Jews. And there's one tablet that's very interesting, that has one interesting word. You can see it here. I called it Regards from Shelmaya in Babylonia, because the whole tablet has a text in Akkadian, which you can see right here. But if you turn it to the side, the top here, and you turn it and you look at it, it has one word in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, Shelmaya. Here you can actually literally see the words, the Shelmaya. And that means that this Shelmaya on this specific tablet was exactly giving some kind of grain for a certain amount of money to this other guy. And when he was referencing his records, he marked his Hebrew Jewish name in Hebrew letters. So we see the Jews had good life in Babylonia. We see it from the biblical sources and the extra biblical sources. How do I know it from the biblical sources? The Navi and Melachim itself tells us that Nebuchadnezzar's palace took care of feeding Yehoiachin and his sons. And here we also see it from another extra biblical, I would say, source that we find that has some kind of certificate that tells us exactly what was the food allowance for Yehoiachin's family and his staff. And it mentions a certain amount of oil for the king himself, a certain amount of oil for the king's son, and a certain amount of oil for the other people from Yehuda. Now, it doesn't matter, as far as I'm concerned, exactly how they were taken care of. The point I want to make is that the life in Babylonian for Jews was pretty good life when we come around to, in a minute, to the Nevuot of Haggai, Zechariah, and we find them also in Ezra, calling them to return to Zion. Before we can go back to the return to Zion, then we have to Shivat Zion, we have to ask one more question. What happened to the Jews in Jerusalem after the temple was destroyed? So I can't go into the story of Gedaliah here, Gedaliah ben Achikan, that's for Shiur and Tzom Gedaliah. But we could say very clearly that as far as King Nebuchadnezzar, the destruction of the temple or destroying the temple wasn't supposed to be the last time a Jew lived in Israel. He actually appointed someone from the king's palace to be in charge of the Jews in Israel. He suggested Gedaliah would be in charge, and he wanted to see a continuity of the Jewish population here in Israel. But the Jews, unfortunately, didn't work out for them. He said that's a shiur for Tzom Gedaliah. And after Gedaliah was murdered, Hashem via Yirmiyahu begs the people to stay in the country even though there's no leader anymore. And what does Hashem tell them in Yirmiyahu? Don't go to Egypt. Don't go away from the land of Israel. And if you go, ולקחתי את שארית יהודה אשר שמו פניהם לבוא ארץ מצרים, לגור שם ותמו כל בארץ מצרים, יפולו בחרב ברעב איתם, ומקטון ועד גדול בחרב וברעב ימותו, והיו לעלה, לשמה ולקללה ולחרפה. God literally begs them not to leave to Egypt, to stay put in Jerusalem or in Yehuda and not go. But unfortunately, the Jews that stayed in Jerusalem, they were afraid of Nebuchadnezzar. They were afraid that after they killed Gedaliah, he would come back again, like he did when Tzidkiyahu rebelled and he destroyed the temple. He left to Mitzrayim. They all left with Yirmiyahu to Mitzrayim, and Hashem says this very harsh prophecy: "V'lo yeh palit v'sarid le'she'erit Yehuda." No one will stay in Yehuda. Habayim lagur shem be'eretz Mitzrayim. No one will be left in Yehuda. Everyone who left to Egypt will not come back to Yehuda either. So let's just stop for 1 second and see where we're standing right before we go to the next part of the Shi'ur, which is exactly the part where we ask what happened in the days of Shivat Zion. The Jews in Bavel are doing pretty well. There was a community in Jerusalem, and after Retzach Gedaliah, most of them fled away to Egypt. And God said specifically that from the peoples that went to Egypt, no one will come back to Yehuda. This is the background when we come to Ezra Perek Aleph. Now, I just want to be clear. Ezra Perek Aleph, the first chapter in Ezra, it does not represent Ezra's days. That's a little later. It's a retrospective description of what happened in 538, which we had the day before on the screen, when Koresh declares that everyone can come back and build the temple. Now let's note what happens in Shivat Zion in Ezra's retrospective description here on the computer front. ובשנת אחת לקורש מלך פרס, לכלות דבר השם מפי ירמיה, 70 years past, that's לכלות דבר השם מפי ירמיה, העיר השם את רוח קורש מלך פרס ויעבר קול בכל מלכותו וגם במכתב לאמור. 70 years passed from the time that the Babylonian Empire came about, and Koresh says everyone can come build their temples. Everyone means the Jews can build their temple, and every nation around the world that I rule can each build their own temple and worship their own God. Now notice the wording here. Mi bachem mikol amo, yehi Elohav imo, v'yal Yerushalayim b'Yehuda, v'yiven et Beit Hashem Elokei Israel. Hu Elohim b'Yerushalayim. Anyone who wants to come and be part of what we'll call Shivat Zion is more than welcome. But, and notice that this is said from day one, Kol hanish'ar mikol hamekomot asher hu gar sham. Anyone who prefers to stay where they live, that's fine too. What should they do? ינשאו אנשי מקומו בכסף ובזהב וברכוש ובבהמה עם הנדבה לבית האלוהים אשר בירושלים. Anyone who prefers to stay, that's fine too. There's another option on the table. The second option on the table, if you don't want to come to Jerusalem and build the temple in Jerusalem, what you can do is send with the people that are going silver and gold and property and animals, anything that you want to send is fine. And they'll use it to build the temple. So here we already see that before they even started to come back, when they just had the opportunity to come back, the Persian Empire's king's assumption is some will come, but some will prefer to stay in exile. I want to stop here for a minute and ask if there are any questions. I'm looking at the chat if anyone wants to ask anything or if something's not clear before I move on. I want to just make sure we understand in summary that we have a Jewish community in Bavel that's doing pretty well. There's really no one left in Israel. The last inhabitants in Israel went to Egypt and were told by Yirmiyahu that they won't be the ones coming back. Any questions? Can we move on? I hope it means you're with me and I'll move on. Okay, yeah? Okay, I'm moving on. So the next thing we see is really that ויקומו ראשי האבות ליהודה ובנימין והכהנים והלוויים לכל העיר האלוהים את רוחו לעלות לבנות את בית השם אשר בירושלים. So really, a lot of the people from ראשי האבות, the leaders of Yehuda and Binyamin, and priests and Levites, they all are excited to come back. But we also right away hear that the Persian king knew what he was talking about, because he right away says, the verses right away say, וכל סביבותיהם חיזקו בידיהם בכלי כסף, בזהב, ברכוש ובבהמה ובמגדנות, לבד על כל מתנדב, על כל התנדב. Meaning, there were from day one people who actually preferred not to come. They gave them gold, goods, silver, whatever, vessels, but they didn't join them. And as we saw, they had a pretty good life in Babylonia. והמלך כורש הוציא את כלי בית השם אשר הוציא נבוכדנצר מירושלים והתנם בבית אלוהיו. And the Persian Empire's king Koresh actually gave them the temple's vessels to take with them. How did it look when they came? It looked very confusing. How do I know it looked very confusing? So let's see the sources throughout. The biblical sources we have from Shivat Zion time. Again, Ezra Perek Gimel is a retrospective text describing what happens a few months right after they came. The seventh month came, that's the month of Tishrei. Vayakom Yoshua ben Yotzadak ve'achav haKohanim uZerubbabel ben Shaltiel. Here are the leaders, and they build a Mizbeach. The temple is not built yet. It takes many years. We'll discuss it in a minute. But day one, they build a Mizbeach, and they want to give sacrifices on it. Kakatuv betorat Moshe Ishe Elokim. And they prepare the Mizbeach. Ve'achinu Mizbeach al mechonotav. And they do it quickly because they're afraid of the people around them. And they do Sukkot like it was done in the past. And here we see their reaction. ויסדו הבונים את היכל השם, ויעמידו הכהנים מולבשים בחצוצרות, והלוויים בני אסף. It's a very exciting day, and the priests are standing dressed up with horns in their hands, and their trumpets, in their hands, and it's going to be a very exciting day. And in this exciting day, after ויענו בהלל ובהודות להשם, כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו, and they're very excited. And now let's look at the third verse on the screen. ורבים מהכהנים והלוויים וראשי האבות הזקנים אשר ראו את הבית הראשון ביסדו, זה הבית בעיניהם בוכים בקול גדול, ורבים בתרועה בשמחה להרים קול. So what's the reaction of the people who actually came back? Some of them are very excited, but a lot of them that remember the first temple are standing there crying, meaning we have the establishment of this second temple. It's just the Mizbeach so far, nothing more than just an opportunity to give sacrifices, and some are crying. And the verses continue. ואין העם מכירים כל תרועת השמחה לכל בכי העם. It was hard to differentiate between the people that were crying and the people that were happy. These were heard to far, and these were heard to far, and we see how Shivat Zion is not as glamorous as we thought it would be. What happens next? Here again, we have three important dates in the history of Shivat Zion. After we saw 538 was when we had Hatzarat Koresh. We actually have another three dates that basically you can see through them. 520, the renewal of the construction of the temple. 518, the question we'll see in a minute, do we continue fasting for the first temple when we're building the second temple? And finally, 516, they finally are celebrating the fact that the temple was rebuilt. Why does it take from 538 BCE until 516, almost 20 years, to get the temple building built and what we would call today the show off the road? What happened? And here we can see a little bit of what happened in these in this period through the prophecy of Haggai. And the prophecy of Haggai really tells us how complicated it was in Israel in the days of Shivat Zion, how not straightforward it was that Hashem was with them, how not straightforward it was that these were amazing times for the Jewish nation, or an opportunity to build another second temple that we will remember 2,000 years later. And here's what we see. The date is on the first pasuk, the prophecy is Haggai. I'm going on to the second pasuk. What is the nation feeling in Israel? כה אמר השם צבאות לאמור, העם הזה אמרו לא את בו את בית השם להיבנות. They look around and they say, this must not be the time for the second temple to be rebuilt. The time has not yet come for the rebuilding of the house of God. That's the feeling of the people. And what does Hashem answer? וידבר השם ביד חגי הנביא לאמור, העת לכם אתם לשבת בבתיכם ספונים, והבית הזה חרב? What are you guys talking about? How could it be that you think that this is not an opportunity? Why did the Jews left in Israel? Okay, I'll answer in a minute. Why do you think this is not an opportunity for the Beit HaMikdash to be rebuilt? This is opportunity, but notice the contra between the two houses in the pasuk. We have two houses here. We have ha'et lachem atem lashevet bevateichem sfunim. You have your houses. You're sitting closed in your houses. Reminds me of what I was sitting at home today. Ve'abayit hazeh, God's house, is still destroyed. If you want something to change, then it has to be your initiative, meaning it won't happen if you don't make it happen. And what does Hashem tell them? You're feeling that there's no rain, that there's no grain, that there's no food, that you're trying so hard and you don't have any grain. But what does Hashem say? Again, look at the second pasuk here. If you want something to change, you have to change the way you are acting. What do I mean by the way you are acting? Start moving, build the building, bnu habayit. And once you start building it, even though the circumstances around you seem so hard, I will want it, I will stay there. And then God goes on saying, you're looking and you're expecting a lot and you see little, but wait a minute, bring what you have to the house, and got my house, the temple, God's house. And then you'll see that I will be there. Because in the circumstances now is that you came to Israel, you're building your own houses, but you're not taking care of my temple. And Hashem explains, that's why there's no rain. And that's why and that's why there's now no rain at all, and there's nothing that you could, no crop for you to build on. But basically, in a nutshell, Haggai's message is, you're sitting around waiting for a temple to come from heaven, or you're sitting around waiting for this to happen on its own merits. But really, it depends on you. And that's the same answer that he gives them 2 years later in 518, when they ask him in Zechariah, should they be fasting for this first temple in the days when the building of the second temple? And God's answer to them is, look at the last verse here, why are you asking me? Who's the person who's supposed to be fasting? It's you guys. You decide for yourselves what these times are all about. All I could tell you is that it'll either be now or in the future, but one day, all the fasts, Tzom HaRevi'i, V'Tzom HaChamishi, V'Tzom HaShvi, all the fasts that were marked for the temple's destruction, or the temple's being destroyed, will be one day be Moadim Tovim V'Emet V'Shalom Ehav. So we're going to skip this. So what does the Persian Empire look like? The Persian Empire is as big as you can see here. And we're talking about Jews in two different places. We're talking about Jews sitting here during this time, struggling to build the temple. And we're talking about Jews, another big community of Jews sitting here that are doing pretty well off. And we know that for not only for what we said before, that Yachin was given opportunity from the clay tablets from Al Yehudu, but we also know that from the book of Daniel, that Daniel was doing pretty well. We'll hear soon about Ezra and Nehemiah's coming to Jerusalem, and they come, especially Nehemiah comes from a very prominent position in the palace. And we know one more thing, which is for a topic for a different Jew, that Megillat Esther takes place when the temple in Jerusalem was already built, and none of the Jews in Persia feel that this is a place they should be going to for seeking for help when they're under the ruling of Hachashverosh and Haman, and the fears that we fear from on Purim and what we celebrate on Purim. Now, someone asked in the chat, and I just want to answer briefly, why didn't the Jews actually come, the Jews that fled to Egypt, why didn't they make it all the way to Babylonia? Because what we see, and I'll continue the question, it would make more sense. Life there is much better. I'll just say that we're talking about Jews that are, after the temple is destroyed, left with no means at all, very, very poor, have very, very little capability. We're not talking about the elite of the nation that like in Galut Yoachin, make this whole way with a lot of property. We're talking about Jews that as far as they can reach is basically crossing the border, fleeing away right here to Egypt in an attempt to save their lives. So reaching until Bavel was just not an option. I'm starting to close up, so I will say here, just to understand the historical context and perspective, and then a few closing notes. We mentioned that Megillat Esther takes place here, and that the Jews sitting in Paras don't see the people in Jerusalem, or the temple in Jerusalem, or the priests, or the Levites in Jerusalem a reference point. Ezra comes, and what does Ezra find? He finds the temple, Jerusalem, in an awful situation, and a spiritually awful situation, and Nehemiah comes and finds that the walls are an awful situation, and really the second temple, which already is built by now, since as we saw from 516 it was built, and we're now talking approximately 50 years later after it was built, is still not getting off the ground. It's still, I would say, in a daily process of trying to find its means to actually survive. And that's basically the case of how the temple, from what we know, we have very little information from after the biblical times until the Hellenistic ruler in 332 BCE, Alexander Mukdon. We have one short brief time of independence from the empire throughout the whole 600 years, throughout the whole 600 years of the Second Temple, and that brief time, we'll get back to this in a minute, is what we celebrate Hanukkah for. Is the Medinat HaChashmonaim, the independent Hashmonaean state, from 140 BCE to 63 BCE. Some Zionists here wait for us to be, if you could notice, it's about 77 years. Some people say the minute that the state of Israel will be longer than the Hashmonae state, we're almost there, it's less than 10 years, then we'll be able to really say we've done history. We've done something that never happened before, ever since the days of David and Shlomo. But basically, the whole Second Temple period, 600 years, we have almost around 80 years that we're talking about independence. And also then, if you learn history, it wasn't so easy to be a Jew who lived in the independent Hashmonae state in those years in Israel, even though we had a standing temple. 66 CE, the temple is destroyed. And for 2,000 years, we were never independent in our country in Israel. Now, I want to mention one more comment that has to do with the Qumran scrolls. What do the Qumran scrolls teach us? The Qumran scrolls teach us that they were all written during the Second Temple period, and I just took two brief examples because of our time restrictions, just in order to see that Jews were yearning for a better temple while the second temple was standing. One example is a temple scroll that says specifically how they're waiting for a future temple. Another example is a text called Pseudo Ezekiel that also is waiting, when will finally God come to us? I could have given more examples, like Jubilees and other books that are extra biblical books that are all traced back to sometime during the Second Temple period, some earlier, some later, and they have one thing in common. They have an amazing yearning for the temple to be rebuilt. Now you would say, what do you mean? You have an existing temple. It's not like today. Why are you yearning for the temple to be rebuilt? And the answer is that the days of Shivat Zion, marked as substantial days that had a huge opportunity, is something that we know to say today in retrospect. It's not so obvious that someone living then would have understood the opportunity, would understand that this will be one day coined and called the days of Shivat Zion. And many times I wonder, and I'll do my best to see you all and the chat, many times I wonder, what will we coin these days as? What will we look back and say these, days of 2020, 2019, if you want, since the State of Israel started, however you want to call it, what will we say these days were? And I feel, and this will be my closing note here, before taking questions and comments, that it has a lot to do with God's will for us all to have free bchira chofshit, for us all to be able to choose our ways. If things were obvious, if they were obvious then maybe we would have all the Jews coming back to Israel, or maybe we would have the temple rebuilt in a different way. But part of being a part of a world where everyone has their own responsibility for their choices is also the fact that there's not always one obvious way to do things. And it's in retrospect that we know to say, here, this was a huge opportunity. This is what could have happened. This was what was missed. And I really don't know to say. It's a good question mark. What will we say about these years, these days, even these specific times when we look back? I don't know if 2,000 years, but it's enough to say in a few hundred years from now. So I wish that we'll find that Yom Haasmaut and the days that we're celebrating this week are actually even more substantial than we understand them, and even without having the words of prophets to be able to tell us how to evaluate them or how to understand them, we'll be able to have some insights about what we were expected to materialize or to do these days. Ad kan. I'll stop here. And I will take a question here. I see Rob asked, what percentage of exiles returned after Cyrus' decree? What percentage stayed in exile? Many people became professors trying to answer that question, Rob. That's a brief answer, but I'll give you a real one. Probably a small percentage of the Jews, meaning even though the lists, even in Israel, look like long lists, if you literally count the people, we're not talking about such a majority. We don't really know how many Jews continued living in Babylonia, but I can tell you that we have traces of the clay tablets for at least 100 years, and it seems like they were doing pretty well. Afterwards, we don't have any evidence, not biblical, not extra biblical, and it's actually a time that's like a black hole, not only for our history, but for the Persian period empires. When it goes on, is actually something that we don't know enough about in general in history. We know more again when Alexander Mokdon comes about. But I think it would be fair to say that the majority stayed in Babylonia. What else? Oh, thank you. According to the pattern of the prophets, will there be a third temple? Wow. So I'm repeating the question. You can ask it. By the way, you can write these questions so everyone sees them, but I'll read them out loud anyway. According to the pattern of the prophets, will there be a third temple? There will be another temple. Would it be called the third? Will it be the last? What will it be? I don't know. I'll say something just for you to think about. Even in the earlier times of the first temple, if we look, for instance, at Yeshayahu Perek Bet or Yeshayahu Perek Yud Aleph, chapters in Yeshayahu that are clearly the days where the first temple is not right before it's being destroyed. Yeshayahu is in the days of Yotam, Achaz, Chizkiyahu. Let's say we're talking about the 7th or the 8th century BCE. We already see prophets prophesying, like Yeshayahu, one day there'll be a Hal Beit Hashem Berosh Ha'amim. One day there'll be a temple at the head of the mountains. One day we'll want to see something more significant as our temple. So I would say that throughout the first temple and second temple, in many different ways, there were many, many years that the temple didn't meet the Jews' expectations or the prophets' expectations. And in those cases, they always said, one day God will get recognition from the entire Jewish nation / the entire world. And when that day comes, then that will also be through the temple. We can see it, for instance, in the Haftarah of last week and the Haftarah of this week. We just read the Haftarah this Shabbos. I mean, I wasn't in a shul, but I read it at home. But let's say for those of you who are in shuls, was Hashamayim Kis'i, the last chapter of Yeshayahu, Samech Vav. What's Hashamayim Kis'i? It's God's telling us, you're not worshiping the temple like you should, but the whole planet is mine, the sky, the earth, and one day you will also come practice in a temple and you will bring me the Chodesh Bechodsho, the sacrifices like it should be. And this coming Haftarah, Parashat Achrei Mot Kedoshim, which is one of the most complicated parashot of what you read, but you probably read, like Minhag Sfaradim, you read either Amos or Yechezkel, but if you read Amos, that's, I think, also only some communities read, then you'll see in Amos Tet, the last chapter of Amos also, and we're still talking about the first day's temple, addressing a request to have another temple. So in a nutshell, it's not a third temple, it's the right temple, and it's something the prophets continuously were asking for.